Good day, everyone, and welcome to the QEM Heroes webinar series. I'm Christine Wood, and I serve as the Assistant Program Director for the Heroes Fellows Program at QEM. And for more than 30 years, QEM has been a national catalyst for STEM education transformation and research capacity building. Currently, the QEM network serves nearly 900 colleges and universities and reaches more than 8,000 individuals nationwide. This webinar is part of the HEROES initiative. The HEROES program brings together researchers with experience in the federal government to lend their expertise and support to the STEM research and education communities. Our fellows are here to provide tools and tips for navigating the funding landscape, developing STEM programs and partnerships, and improving talent retention in in-demand fields. We hope this series promotes engagement with our Heroes Fellows and provides valuable resources to our participants. As a note, the webinar recordings and slides will be available in the QEM Resource Hub. By attending this webinar, you will soon be added to the QEM network and granted access to the hub. And I'm so proud to introduce our Heroes Fellows today. Dr. Frances Carter Johnson is an innovative problem solver with professional experience spanning commercial, academic, government, and nonprofit sectors, as well as multidisciplinary content, data management, and analytic expertise. Her technical areas of expertise include data science, AI and data evaluation, public policy, physics, and engineering. And James Smith III is a retiree from the U.S. Department of Defense. In his 20-year career at DoD, he served as a site engineer, software engineer, systems engineer, project director, and an engineering and physical science researcher at the North Carolina State University Laboratory for Analytic Sciences. In these roles, he developed and refined expertise in artificial intelligence and machine learning programming, software engineering, and 3D graphics. He also advanced mission-critical research and partnered with students and faculty from minority-serving institutions in support of research goals. Without further ado, I'd like to turn the floor over to our presenters today.
All right, thank you. What we're going to talk about today is synthetic data generation and how we used it in the intelligence community. This is just to give you an idea of some of the projects that we have going on, not necessarily to go into the technical details of creating synthetic data. So with that, I'm gonna go ahead and pass it on to Frances so she can get us started with our first poll.
Thank you. Will probably provide one or two examples that were not from the intelligence community as well, but it's too late to change the title. So we're definitely talking about synthetic data generation. Go ahead and share the poll if you wouldn't mind, Christine. These are our pre-webinar polls. We always just like to get an understanding of the audience and your prior knowledge of synthetic data generation. We know that it's it's used widely in intelligence and market research and educational evaluation. So tell us a little bit about whether you have used or generated synthetic data in any of your work. And if you've used it in other ways, feel free to put that in the chat. And maybe tell us, the second question then is what type of synthetic data have you used? And you can choose all of those if you've used multiple types of synthetic data.
We'll just give folks a few moments to respond to the poll.
We do have some variety then. We have some people have used it for research, some are not familiar, and some people teach about synthetic data generation in university level courses. Would love to hear in the chat what courses those are that you're teaching about synthetic data in, and even about those research projects. We definitely have more conversation about the research projects later. Image data, audio data, numeric and text data are all the different types of data that have been used. Very little video data. Well, James will talk about video data later in the presentation. But thank you for responding to those and engaging with us today. So we have an understanding of the exposure already to synthetic data. So what is synthetic data for those who may not be familiar, just we're learning more about what it is. Synthetic data generation is the process of creating artificial or computer generated data. So synthetic data generation is the generation of synthetic data. It's done to mimic the statistical properties or patterns or correlations of real world data, but without having the sensitive information. So that could be data about, as this example shows, age and income and location. Say if your market research organizations use synthetic data and therefore they don't have to get permission from uh, the users of whatever system they're using, but they might know some information about the users and generate a synthetic data set using an algorithm or using an AI or machine learning model to generate similar data that has no real individual information, and therefore no sensitive information. Let's talk a little bit more about that. Why would one want to use synthetic data? We just talked about the privacy issue. We all have been faced with not wanting companies to share our data and going through those processes. But so sometimes companies can then, instead of using actual data, maybe create data that's similar to their users and then protect the privacy of the sensitive information. You can still, because that data is generated using by knowing something about the data set, the attempt is to generate still have the same patterns and statistical properties of the original data set. And then, but still being able to use the data with similar patterns. It using synthetic data allows increased innovation, more safe analysis and testing, and then improves AI and machine learning development. And it also minimizes the compliance risk of having to request permission to use data, especially about students or consumers for a company. They might be using synthetic data that's similar to our data, but not actually data. And it minimizes data sharing risk, again, because you are decreasing the privacy concerns. And so the data that you're sharing doesn't have private information, or the information that you're sharing should not be private. So that as you're sharing data, hopefully not running the risk of identifying people and having hackers be able to tap into that data as well. It is primarily used to train machine models, but and to protect user privacy and address data scarcity. In the times that I've used synthetic data, that has been the issue, and I'll talk about that a little bit on the next slide. So the first type of synthetic data that we want to talk about is text or numerical data sets. So from a social science or educational research standpoint, you're accustomed to a flat file of data with as large as you possibly want, but you often don't get large data sets, or you get data that has missing information if you have cohorts of data. And so that is when social science researchers or evaluators might use synthetic data to improve the analytic rigor or the possibilities, the analyses that can be done on that data. The example that I'm thinking about, I can't talk about it in much detail because I am no longer with the National Science Foundation, who I formerly worked, but we had a contract that took data for a program that was located that had different locations across the country and had data had about 30 years of data, but that data had gaps and holes in it, or differences and variations, because all the different sites for the program did not collect the same data. But the goal was to be able to utilize the 30 years of data. And the contractor that we work with in that particular case was BCT Partners. I have them listed here. They took the data set that was available for that program, and they actually generated a synthetic data set using the patterns and the statistical information about the data set to make it as realistic as possible to the current data set. They actually combined the two data sets, and used the combined data set with a precision analytics, which is just another term for machine learning model. It's the term that that company used. Again, they were able to mimic the real world characteristics without violating FERPA. Actually, this program had permission to have the data because they had collected the data over time, but it still allowed more rigorous analysis and didn't, and the data was, or the analysis didn't have to be hindered by the missing data and the issues with the data set. The steps that they took the actual data and they used an algorithm to identify subgroups and create match comparison groups. From that, they were able to determine the ideal program model and do causal evaluation of the program model using that data. So again, it allowed for a causal inference or causal analysis, whereas in if we had just used the previous data, it would have been more quasi-experimental. So, although that paper can't be shared or that information, that study, BCT Partners has several white papers on precision analytics that were used with foster care populations and one on psychiatric residential treatment for children. And the Urban Institute, who also does a lot of evaluation for the federal government or social science research, actually has a fact sheet about synthetic data. Oftentimes these days, many people use Python or open source data sets. So, depending on, there are several Python packages that can be used to generate text or numeric synthetic data and also video data. And it depends on the type of data that you want to generate. If you want to have the actual data and generate data that is based on the patterns of an actual data set, then you would use the wide data synthetic model. If you want to generate fake data from scratch, there are some packages in Python called Faker or Mimesis. So several different packages that can be used to generate different types of synthetic data, given whatever statistical software you want to use. I would assume R probably has the same capability, James. What are your thoughts as Python?
Now, Python is the default that we've always used. I think R has some capabilities as far as being able to generate synthetic data when you're dealing with text, but we always use just Faker because you can simulate bank accounts, social security numbers, names, places, everything you need to create a profile of a certain individual, of a synthetic individual that can be used then to train your computer models.
Perfect. Passing it on to you.
All right, so next we're going to deal with images. What you have here is an example of a motherboard. The idea was you want to be able to detect the different components on that motherboard and identify that using machine learning. In this case, Blender was used to simulate this environment. To your left is the actual model in Blender, and to the right is the object detection, identifying the components of the motherboard. This is just an example of using images. Another issue that we tend to want to focus on as far as intelligence, like if you go to the next slide, we want to know, is the person real or fake? What are we dealing with here? And so here's a little test. If you can bring up the next poll, identify which image is real and which one is fake. Let's, let's see your choices. And the whole goal when you're doing this, when you're looking for little details. It's not quite obvious. Sometimes it's not as obvious, but you're looking for little details in the images that gives it away. And sometimes it's very obvious, and you're like, oh yeah, this is fake. But let's see the choices.
I'll give participants just a moment to respond.
And then I point out the flaws in the one fake image that gives it away. Oh, so it's pretty even. So image A is the fake. And the way you go about looking at it is, in this case, look at his eyebrows. They're not quite symmetrical. And so you're looking for like little details like that in images. A lot of time it's the shadow that the image is reflected. It's not quite natural, or it's reflecting on the opposite side. Try to look around the lips. Is it symmetrical? Like, I mean, don't get me wrong, not everybody have symmetrical lips, but most cases, everything is symmetrical. The eye colors, the bags around the eyes, is it the same? But in his case, if you look at the eyebrow on the left and the eyebrow on the right, you can clearly see that it's not symmetrical. It's sort of one is thicker than the other one. So that's one way. So now that you have this knowledge, if you go to the next slide, let's do another one and see which one you can identify as the real and the fake. Like you said, you're looking for little details. But this is where, when you train your model to detect things like this is what you're looking for. This is where you need to have that expertise that, to me, I will always say you need to have that human element to make sure it's doing what it's supposed to do. Because just looking at, if you look at the pictures just as it's going by, you're not gonna be able to tell if it's real or fake. But this is where you hope when you train your model, it can be able to detect, okay, this is a real person, this is a fake person, especially in today's climate when you people saying, hey, that wasn't me, that was AI. I didn't say these things. So you can easily, oh, let's find out if that's really you or not. Yeah, okay. 62% say it's image A, and that is correct. Image A is the fake one on this one. And so, and once again, it's the eyebrows that gives to me that gives it away. It's not quite symmetrical. One is a little thicker than the other one, and if you look at the eyes, one's a little more puffier than the other one. So it's just little details that you got to look for. Yes, I see a hands up.
And another thing that I always look for, and this is Tarina, sorry. The other thing I always look for is if you look at her shoulder in the fake one, the fold is very I guess blurred. It's not an obvious crisp fold. It's
Yeah,
too perfectly, smooth. And then on the right side of her face, the gray item in the back.
yep.
Yeah. So like you said, very little details is the thing you have to look for.
And that's normally what you're trying to train your model to be able to detect these things when you're trying to determine if an image is real or fake. And so if you go to the next slide, this is where we're trying to do videos. I did not put the video. I have the video as a backup slide. I did this video in a previous webinar, if you want to see it, for Edge AI processing, but I do have it as a backup if anybody want to see it. But in this case, this is an example of a project we were working on with Dr. Samit Bhattacharya from Fayetteville State. And the ultimate goal was to create a synthetic environment of various Russian weapons. And he basically pulled a lot of these models from, say, like Turbo Squid. And you made the necessary adjustment. And then it's about how much synthetic data can we create in this synthetic video to detect, which is on the right, a real Russian spy plane. And so we was able to use synthetic data to train the computer model on synthetic data to detect the real object in a real video. But like you say, you don't necessarily want to do that all the time, because when you're using synthetic data, you want to give it like different object, different orientation, different location in the image. So when you do train the computer vision model, it's not just going to focus on one particular point in the image. So the whole goal is you want to make sure your model is very general, where you can put in any type of scenario and it should be able to detect these type of objects. Next slide. So now we're going to go to audio. This is an example of using synthetic data. The ultimate goal is people are using audio for various things, and anybody's voice can be simulated. So the ultimate, can you determine if this object, if this person is saying the things that they're saying? And so that's a big topic that we were very interested in. Like, okay, is what's being said real or not? And so this is an example. I have two examples of President Obama just talking. These are fake. I just want you to listen to it and just, you can tell the quality is not as great, but it's two different types from two different sources. And you should be able to tell, okay, yeah, it sounds like Obama, but it's not quite there. You play the first one.
In order to hear these, turn your volume up pretty loud. If you don't, we'll give you a second to reach your volume and turn it up so you can hear, and we'll make sure this is turned up. Why does this keep going down? So, hope you're ready.
Good morning, America. I'm here to let you know that my grass is green. I need rain. Please rain.
Okay, that's the first one. And that's me. That was what you call text to audio. I just typed in some random text just to see what his voice would say and see how it worked. And so I typed that in. The other one is I just took a newspaper clipping and put it in and use Obama voice to read that newspaper clipping.
Volleyball sports news. Find out more about our volleyball news and media. USYVL gives kids a chance to learn and grow in the sport of volleyball. Volleyball League, USYVL, volleyball training, youth volleyball, volleyball camp, services, become a coach, instructional leagues, summer leagues, etc.
So with audio, you want to be able to, with your model, the ultimate goal within the intelligence community is it real or not when it comes to synthetic data? We all know, okay, this is fake. I created these. But sometimes you get a lot of audio files that's coming in and you trying to identify what's in those audio files. And so can a model where you don't have a lot of data, and can you simulate that audio to create the same sound effect? So in the next slide, what I want you guys to do is, in this case, yes, please turn your volume up, because I believe this one may be a little low. It's a clip, about 30-second clip. And I want you to, as you listen to it, you can type it in the chat or whatever to say exactly what you think you're hearing. Because that's a big issue, because the intelligence community gets a lot of files, and you're trying to identify what's in those files. And sometimes you hear a sound, but you don't know what that sound is. So can you simulate that sound to try to identify that sound? So that's what the synthetic data with sound detection and audio comes in. So you can play that file now. It's pretty low, and that's typical. The quality varies when you're dealing with when you got data coming in, as much data as we have coming in. Sometimes the quality is great, sometimes it's not. But you still got to try to identify that information. So if you want to type in chat what you think you heard, we can play it again while you typing it in the chat, and then I sort of give you sum it up exactly what's taking place in the audio. Okay, I see some people added some stuff. Oh yeah. I don't know if I'm saying your name right, but Kamika, I think that's her name. I think that's the name. You're exactly right. Kamika, that is somebody with keys trying to open the doors to a house. Next up is an explosion. Nobody was killed, but it was an explosion, so that's where you hear all the panic. Another thing with when you're trying to detect sound, a lot the agency want to know how many different voices did you actually hear in this here sound detection. And just I just go and tell you, it's five different voices, three police officers, two residents. One of the police officers is a female, and so they're just checking up on each other, rolling around. It's glass, everything else. They are on a step, and they got knocked backwards. No one was hurt. Everybody got up, but you get a lot of these type of sound videos that comes in where you're trying to identify exactly what's taking place in the audio file. And so this is another way where you can use synthetic data to try to detect the different sounds or different voices or what's actually taking place in this scene to give the analyst an opportunity to say, oh yeah, okay, this may be relevant to whatever else is going on. Okay, next slide. All right, and so let me talk to you about a use case we did back in 2022. This one I was working at the laboratory for analytic science at NC State in Raleigh. The ultimate goal was we had to detect CCTVs. Basically, Congress in 2019 wanted to get rid of all the high vision CCTV cameras in the US. They wanted them out as soon as possible because it was being manufactured in China. And basically, if you know anything about China, everything goes through that system. So, yes, they watch it. So they wanted a way, can we identify these CCTVs? So if you go to the next slide, came up with a use case. We decided to focus on Huawei and high vision CCTVs. These are some of what the cameras look like. If you're not familiar with China, they have CCTVs on every corner in their country. They track every movement, cameras everywhere. And so the US, of course, we put up CCTVs also, but we have laws and policies where you're not supposed to necessarily track individual. We're normally trying to see accidents and everything else. Now the police can, intelligence can't. But in this case, they want to get rid of all these type of cameras, so we need to be able to identify which cameras are Huawei, Hikvision, and let's get them out. The problem with this is we didn't have any trained data set to identify these cameras. Images are scattered all over the internet, no repository to go to. So this was a perfect example for a synthetic data use case. Now, it wasn't my idea. It was a coworker. She brought me on as the TD to work on this. So I give her much props for coming up with this idea. If you go to the next slide. So when we first started out, we used Blender with a software with a plugin called ZPy. The beauty with ZPy is you can develop all your models in Blender, so you can go to Turbo Squid or any other type of source that have 3D models of these cameras, import them. You can label those objects and then create a boatload of synthetic data in a short amount of time. And so in this case, we use Blender with ZPy, and we was able to generate, just to give you an idea how much synthetic data we generated, we was able to generate over 4,000 different angles of a CCTV in like 15 minutes, already labeled. So once you export it, it's already in the COCO format. And so at that point, all you got to do is feed it into your computer vision model to train your model to detect that particular CCTV. So you go to the next slide. These are some of the examples. If you look to the left, that's a Huawei. We was give you an idea of some of the models, how we was working on it, designing it. And then we took a synthetic environment of a China intersection that we found online, and we put the CCTV in various locations in there. And so with that, we found out where when you're doing synthetic data, especially in Blender, you got to have stuff in the background. or otherwise it's just going to focus on that object, and then you get the overfitting and it's just going to recognize that object. So by us using this synthetic environment, as you can see, we generated synthetic fog. We was able to generate rain, snow. You control everything when you're doing it synthetically. It's just a matter of how you want, what you're trying to generate and how much data you're trying to generate. The problem with this here is it's a manual process. So when you say manual, you mean you got to have 3D modelers or animators to create these environments or to generate these environments. From there, we was able to go and use like GANs, generative adversarial networks, to try to automate the process some. And that's another thing that a lot of people are looking into now, which is pretty much here now. If you use any type of Claude, AI, Chat GPT, you can generate a lot of your synthetic data. Now, the question is it doing the labeling? And the number one issue with the synthetic data piece is, depending on how you generate it, is it taking care of the labeling? And so with that, you got to make sure whatever tool you're using, whether you're doing it automatically using some AI tool already available, or you doing it manually, that you are making sure the labeling is coming out. So when you get ready to train your computer vision models, you can. So if you go to the next slide. So some of the type of skill set, like you say, my background was civil engineering and computer science. We had mathematicians, but as you can see, it requires all type of skills. There's no one expert doing this. If you ask me which skill set is the most important, I would tell you domain knowledge. You got to be able to say, yes, this is correct, this is not correct. You are producing the right data. And so that's why we partner with Dr. Sambit from Fayetteville State, because he worked with multiple agencies, Department of Army, NASA, North Carolina Department of Transportation, to create some various type of synthetic data. Yes, Python, AI, ML experts are important, but that's just to produce it. You need that individual to say, yes, this is correct. So these are some of the skill sets that goes into synthetic data. The agency looks for all types of people. It's not just one. You can come in with your background as AWS. As you can see, the cloud jobs, we have it all. So if you go to the next slide. So some of the research, as I mentioned before, I showed you with the audio, we did text to image, text to video. We looked at NERF, neural radiance fields. We work with GANs, but diffusion models. The whole goal is, can you get rid of false positive, and can you make the synthetic data more generalizable? You want to be able to use it for object detection in all scenarios, not just in one particular scenario. And you want to identify whether the information, the data coming in, or you trying to detect is real or fake, depending on what you're using it for. Of course, you want to get rid of all bias, make sure it's fair to all people. You don't want to just do the hallucination and you're getting false data. Physics and simulation, meaning can you generate this data automatically? So that goes back to the text to video, text to images. If I say, hey, I want to generate a 3D model of the Eiffel Tower, can I get that? And then can I train my model to detect that in various environments? So these are some of the topics that we worked on while I was at the Laboratory for Analytic Science. If you go to the next slide. So if you want to work with the agency, U.S. Cyber Command and NSA, they have CRADAs and EPA. These are the links to where you can contact them to identify that you would like to work with them on a CRADA. The process normally takes around 4 to 6 months, depends on how fast, because it's a negotiation between the lawyers. And so everybody got to read it and go back and forth. But also, NGA and the CIA, they also have CRADAs. And the beauty thing about that, you can go to their site and it explains to you exactly the process in getting created with those agencies. It's all pretty much the same. It's all intelligence. They all use synthetic data. It's just a matter of how they're using it. So, and just to give you an idea, NGA, they're satellites looking down. So it's going to be from a top-down approach, whereas us, we look at it from all angles. And I pretty sure CIA is the same way, depending on where they're getting their data from. But U.S. Cyber Command, let me just talk about them real quick. That's cyber. So some of the things, if you're interested in cyber, especially with synthetic data, can you do a sticks format? Uh, can you create synthetic data in a sticks format that makes sense? And that's one of the things, one of the projects we work with Cyber Command, and that's something they're still interested in. Can you create synthetic cyber data and be able to train models on that synthetic cyber data? So here's the contact information for creators and EPAs for various organizations. And so with that, you go to the next slide. Okay, here's some funding opportunities. First one is the Laboratory for Analytic Science. They will start taking their abstracts on July 1st. The deadline is July 31st. It's normally a 3-pager that you submit, and you can submit it. It's open to anyone, colleges, companies, other agencies, anyone can submit. But also, the Navy and DARPA are looking at various AI training for synthetic data to identify certain things. So I put those links here, and you can see those are opening up very soon also. So here's an opportunity where if you want to work with synthetic data, here's some opportunities to get funding to do that type of research. I can speak for the Laboratory for Analytic Science. You normally do the research for a year, and then it goes back at the end of the year. They put on a symposium where you get to come and show your work to government officials to show how you did your research. That's normally in December. So the calendar year for Laboratory for Analytic Science is from January when you start the research to December when you put on the symposium. When they put on the symposium, so you submit a white paper and you're selected. Normally, you'll find out if you're selected by September. I think it's around September, and then from there, they'll let you know when you can start. So with that, I'm gonna hand it over to Francis to close us out.
So we want to hear what you all think and what you have learned. So is individual research, this is perfect. We wanted to hear some questions, um, your questions in the chat, but we also wanted to know when we're just asking these verbally, so put the answers in the chat. After today's webinar, do you see a benefit in using synthetic data for your research or any projects that you have? And you can just give us a yes or no. If you wouldn't mind, please explain why you might want to use synthetic data, and you can come off mute and we can have a discussion about these. And Kamika asks, is individual research accepted? James, and I had a
I
question
would
for you.
say at the Laboratory of Analytic Science, yes. It's you can submit a project, and if it's I'm gonna just say it, if it seems like something the government can use or they're interested in, then yes, it'd be fine to do it individually. But it's got to be something you know you can complete in a year, because everything is year to year.
Just a reminder that the chat is open for everyone. You may also use the Q&A tool to ask questions or raise your hand to come off mute.
Yeah. Does anyone else see a benefit? We got one response. And why or why you may not. We also want to give a plug for our upcoming data and analytic and AI series webinars. Um, We know that we've presented a lot of technical information about AI and different types of data, but we wanted to make space for talking about the ethics and strategy of using AI. And so our June webinar on June 16th is a fireside chat on AI ethics and strategy, responsible AI use, ethics and strategy. Our July talk will be on AI funding opportunities, federal, private, public, and state. We want to try to compile some of those for people to start in different places. And then we will do another fireside chat on AI in education in August, and then in September, thinking about how to use AI in the classroom and preparing students to use AI effectively and ethically once they graduate or beyond the university. Our June talk, I forgot, excuse me for not saying that. Our June talk is James, myself, and our colleague Quincy Brown will join us for our June fireside chat. And this is our information if you'd like to set up a one-on-one with us to talk about AI or synthetic data generation, you definitely can email us and we can find a mutual time to meet with you to talk about projects. We'd also feel free to use the QR code for our QEM events page. That's upcoming webinars, the Heroes webpage as well, and the bottom QR code is for webinar feedback. We'd love to get your feedback about this webinar. And we have one comment in the chat from Frank uh, Jr. that um, it will help synthetic data, I guess, yes, to use it because it will help in situations where you don't have sufficient data for AI training projects. Exactly.
Yep.
Thank you for that comment. I think we didn't get earlier. One question I had was we talked about uh, AI, I'm not AI, but teaching the use and generation of synthetic data in classes. So is that mainly in computer science courses or was that in some other courses? I think it was about 14% of you that said you were using it in your courses. That might be just one or two people, but that was a follow-up question that I had for the audience. And we do have a little time for questions. Do we get another? But that's all the information we have. So pass it over to you, Christina. Christine,
We
Dr.
want
Wood.
to thank you so much for coming to
Did our
our
Q&A.
webinar today. And we have a question in the Q&A. Are we getting copies of the slides? Yes. By attending this webinar, you will be added to the QEM network, and that will grant you access to our resource hub where you can find a copy of the slides as well as a recording of this webinar. Please look out for an email inviting you to join the QEM network resource hub. And in the chat from Dr. Tori Rulack-Smith, since equity is a challenge with machine learning model training, are you aware of using synthetic data to increase representation in data sets?
Um, from my perspective, no, not in the intelligence, but I could see the benefit of using it. Depends on what you're trying to actually do with what you're trying to train your model to do. That's where you can use synthetic data to help offset some of the other data to make it more equitable in your model, make your model more equitable. So I would definitely I see the benefit, but in the intelligence, that's not something we're concerned with at that moment. But I'll also before we go, if you are planning on submitting a proposal to LES, you want someone to you like for it to be looked over before you submit. I do have office hours that I'm more than willing to look over any type of proposal that's going to be submitted uh, in order to see if you're going to get funded, to make sure that if it makes sense, to see if the agency is interested in that type of work. So,
I'll follow up on Tori's question a little bit as well. Yes. Um, because one of the goals of generating synthetic data is to decrease bias. And so you want to understand how a model would work, whether it be you're doing a medical, you're generating synthetic data for in a medical field and you don't have women or so you might generate a synthetic data set that has equal representation of women as men to get a better understanding of the treatment in that case. I mentioned market research, but a lot of health organizations are using and generating synthetic data as well. And in the educational space, say you just don't have the representation of a particular population in, say, STEM. If you don't have a lot of Native Americans, then you might generate a synthetic data set that has trying to create an equal number to think about how the model might need to be changed to reach, um, different populations. So yes.
We have a comment or a question in the chat from Miguel Velez Reyes. You talk about generating data from the same statistical distribution. How do you mix it with mechanistic models to generate large data sets and deal with computational challenges of running mechanistic models?
That's well, in our case, what we learn is you need a combination of both. If you're going to use synthetic data, you cannot just use straight synthetic data. So you want to have a good mixture of both in order to identify or to train the model the way you want to train it. So mixing it, to me, I don't think we care. It's just a matter of how much you got to have. If you're going to mix, you got to have a good amount of synthetic mixed with real data. That's just how it works. That's how you keep things from overfitting, just getting used to identifying just certain things in a certain place in a particular image or video. Just a good mixture. We know when we first did it, we tried to have, we tried all synthetic, and then we went to half and half. And then we learned, okay, recently I just learned where even with the synthetic data, some of the real data, you want to make sure it's it's not the actual data, so they'll know that okay, this is not real. This is not the real data. This is not the synthetic data. But it should the model. You're trying to get the model to a point where it's just generalized, where you can identify it and all. So a good mixture. But to me, that just goes back to trial and error. I mean, you create your model, you test it, and then okay, I had this much data. Let me add more, or take some out. Let me add some bad data to it to see exactly if it's going to work or not.
So I'll agree with James. Um, you're not just generating data and throwing it in a model, right?
Right.
Just like you have to do very extensive cleaning of your data and set up your data for statistical models, you would do the exact same thing with your synthetic data. And you would, you know, you're actually getting a strong understanding of your real data in order to generate the synthetic data. So you have to understand the statistical properties of your real data and then test those two data sets against each other to make sure you're maintaining that statistical distribution. And we don't want to get into the technical details of all the statistical tests that you have to do
Right.
to do that. But there's quite a bit of legwork and statistical testing that has to be done to make sure that you are matching statistical properties of the data. And the problem that we ran into is a scientist may do that, right? Or an evaluator may do that, but how do you make your client, whoever your client is, and I guess if you do one of these proposals to the Army, you have to be able to let the Army know and provide the proof and the evidence that your synthetic data was just as good, why it was good, and why the outcomes or the results that you're providing make sense and are appropriate model. Um, and you have to make your client understand that, whoever the client is, whether it's the Army or if you're doing evaluation and you're working with a company that wants to understand how their intervention is working over some time, or if you're doing market research, or if you're looking at health data, you might generate that synthetic data, but you have to be able to talk in real world terms about why that data is appropriate and why it makes sense to use and is providing the results that you trust. And I didn't answer with the mechanistic model answer, but that was a general answer. Go
Right.
ahead, Tarina.
So I have two things. One is a comment, I guess a piggyback off of Miguel's question, and or not piggyback, it's an extension of it. He specifically asked about the computational challenges, and I think that's probably situational to the lab. But I wanted you to see if you could say something along about address that part of the question.
So the computational challenges of whatever model you're trying to run, an AI or ML
Running
model.
mechanistic models, yeah, that's what he has in the chat. Yeah.
I think like you said, it would depend on what um we've generalized it a lot, but there is a lot of testing and where did we go? I explain it as James explains it. You'd have to test whatever computational model you're running. There are particular you're trying to rule out the false positives, so you might put false positives there. So it really depends. It depends on what computational models you're trying to run and actually knowing the specifics of those. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it goes back to what lab you're in, how much money you
yeah,
have, what
Right.
kind of systems you're using. So all of that plays a role in it. So it's not just a plug and play kind of thing. You have to have a
no,
particular environment for the amount of data you're trying to run because you're trying to run space data. That's a whole different thing than running the camera data that you were talking about. So I
Right.
just wanted to address that aspect. But the question that I have is more kind of goes in line with what Tori was saying about earlier about biases. It's about representation, really. And my question is about bias. If you're building synthetic data based on data you have, how do you address the fact that the data that you have it may be biased? And the reason that kind of came to my mind is because you talked about women. If 90% of the information you have is about men and only 10% is about women, how are you creating this synthetic data just off 10% of your data? Or what do you do? What do you do to mitigate that issue, I guess is my question.
Well, that goes to me, that still goes back to what are you trying to train your model to do? And
hmm
so if you're, like you say, if you're gonna do men and women, and that's just, I'm just serious. You trying to make sure, okay, you got a bunch of civil engineers, most of the civil engineers are men, but there are some civil engineers that are women, and you want to be able to identify both men and women equally, then you would just create synthetic data to represent women in order to train your model to hopefully to detect both men and women equally, even though majority of your civil engineers are men. And so that's just I just look at that as okay, create more data in that particular for that particular type of person or individual or object that you're trying to identify and mix that in with the real data that you currently have in order to till it get to a point to where you can do both, identify men and women.
And in the example, the educational research or educational evaluation example, the synthetic data that which we think that there's bias in terms of underrepresentation in STEM. So in generating the synthetic data, they attempted to generate data that to not include race in generating the synthetic data. So to remove where we think the bias is coming from, let's look at other characteristics
Mhm.
so that we don't incorporate race. And so the same thing for, women, right? You might have a sample that's 90% men and 10% women, but let's generate an additional sample of about women based on factors that we don't think are biased, but to increase. And then you have to test it, right?
Right.
Mhm.
Then you do want to test it afterwards. But
Okay.
we oversimplified it. We oversimplified it, but it's interesting.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you for your questions and participation today and for a very informative talk. Gets me thinking about my social science background and modeling and new frontiers for doing this kind of work, especially in, as you mentioned, Dr. Carter Johnson and health equity research, where it could be really, really useful for synthetic data generation to make projections. And I just wanted to plug that and say that. Thank you so much for attending today. We hope to see you at a future webinar. You can go to our QEM events page for upcoming webinar series, and we hope to see you again soon. Thank you so much for attending today.